All right, let's get started here. So for those of you just joining, welcome to our webinar today on simplifying Azure Observability from home. My name's Charlie Klein. I'm part of the product marketing team at Logz.io, and I'll be doing a bit of moderating today. So just a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce you to our speakers. Firstly, you'll be receiving a recording of this webinar afterwards, so don't worry if you need to get up for a moment. Also, please contribute to the conversation at any time in the chat box, whether you have a comment or a question. The whole idea here is that you'll be able to interact with us on Azure Observability. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jessica Dean, who is joining us from Microsoft. She's a senior cloud developer advocate over there. And we also have Asaf Eagle, who is Logz.io's head of product and co-founder. So Jessica and then Asaf, if you could both tell us a bit about yourselves, and then I'll kick us off.
Sure. My name is Jessica Dean, and I am a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. I focus very heavily and I'm passionate about all things containers, open source, Linux, and DevOps. And I love, honestly, aside from just those technologies, I also love engaging with other engineers around the world and helping find the best possible solutions for whatever the case may be.
Hi, and my name is Asaf Eagle, and I'm one of the co-founders of Logz.io and also heading up the product, engineer at heart, and really like open source and in what we do. Also like being involved with the community and contributing content and helping as much as needed.
Awesome, thanks Asaf and Jessica. So let's jump right into it. First, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the general challenges of operating and running production remotely, and then we can gradually start getting into more specifics around how to understand what's happening in our Azure environments remotely. So Asaf, if you could kick us off here. So how has working remotely and managing a team of engineers impacted the way Logz.io operates as a company, and how has it impacted your team's ability to deliver reliable, scalable SaaS offering to our customers?
Sure, it's a good question, Charlie. So obviously, Logz.io is a company that's based out of we're based out of Boston in the U.S. and Tel Aviv in Israel. So we're used to being in different offices, and the other offices that we have is London and San Francisco. So we're already used to being distant from one another. So this kind of like played as an advantage as we got into this. Was just talking before this, the speed that and the velocity that this thing came about. I think left a lot of companies in a state of uncertainty. And one of the things that we've developed very, very quickly is the ability to work with each other remotely without being in the same office. So whether it's facilities, whether it's making sure that everybody has everything he needs in order to develop, communication in place, and making sure that technology is not getting impacted by it. So we've had to put a lot of infrastructure in place, and we had to put a lot of policies in place. I think other than that, organization these days are in order to be competitive, you have to be running on the cloud, which is a given. So very few organizations have a physical data center that they need to visit. And you're also, if you want to be able to run continuous integration, continuous delivery, you're basically using Docker and Kubernetes, different flavors, different variations of them, or different combinations of them, which means that you're using open source. So you're already in a state where there is increased complexity, and the additional complexity of not being in the same office, not being able to talk whenever you want, is making things harder. One hand, the other hand is also making things easier for people to focus on, to people to develop more higher quality code, and that's it. So this is kind of like it's been our experience. I can tell you, I've been on some calls where kids are jumping in the background, and you can make a choice of how you see it, and I think it creates a nice level of also intimacy within the company of seeing how people work and getting to know them at their home environment. So that's kind of like from our perspective.
Hey, thanks Asaf. And hey, Jessica, how is that aligned with what you've heard from interacting with engineers in the field?
have to unmute myself. I think that aligns pretty well. I mean, I work in the Bay Area when I'm not traveling. So prior to COVID, a lot of companies around here support remote working environments, but working from home and working remotely does not equal working from home and working remotely during a pandemic. So you add in the additional stresses and complications that we're seeing from engineers now trying to focus on not only engineering, communicating with their teams, now in a distant and I think attention distant perspective, kids in the background, homework and school and other distractions going on. As much as engineers, I think, still want to create quality code, and I have heard from a lot of engineers that their work hours have now switched to the evening, the trouble still, I think, kind of falls in line with figuring out the best way to communicate with their teams and then be able to see what's going on in their systems, find the answers immediately, especially in Docker and Kubernetes and distributed systems. It's already, again, prior to COVID-19, that was already sometimes a gray area of trying to figure out what was going on where. A lot of customers would manually set up Elk Stacks and Prometheus and Grafana, and they have their dashboards, but when they have to click around and deep dive into something, it would get very confusing and it would get sometimes very stressful. So currently with the pandemic going on, I have heard from engineers how when tensions are high, it's even harder to focus and harder to make sure that they can keep their attention on tasks at hand. And in fact, a lot of times I end up hearing from engineers that it's nearly impossible. It's the attention either goes in one direction or another.
No, I was on mute. Thanks, Jessica. So you mentioned how it was already kind of tricky understanding what exactly is going on in your environment using open source before the pandemic. How do you think operating remotely has impacted engineers' ability to operate and manage these open source tools in scaling Kubernetes environments?
I think right now, just because the attention factor, the distractions are plentiful, the stress from trying to focus on work and in the midst of, again, a pandemic, being at home, having to, I mean, even if you're at home and you're an engineer with kids, your morning usually starts off with preparing them for homeschool, and then they need food and snacks. And the second you sit down to look at whatever failure happened, you start clicking or diving into your dashboard and your tool set, and the kid in the background has another question, or your coworker in a different time zone pings you, and then you get distracted with something going on in your house. So I think even before, while it was tricky, it's even harder now because it's easy to get anxious, it's easy to get distracted, it's easy to get overwhelmed. And I think a lot of engineers are looking for ways to simplify that, to streamline that, to reduce anxiety, and just have something easier when it comes down to managing their observability, managing what's in front of them, managing what's going on in their environments, and being able to very quickly and easily visualize the state and health of their systems.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Hey, Asaf, I think that might be a good time to kind of get into how Logz.io could help simplify the use of open source for observability. Do you mind sharing your screen?
Sure. So
make you a presenter here.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Sure can.
Yes.
Good. So I think is that what Jessica said is absolutely what we're seeing with our customers and what we're seeing ourselves. So organization that were already at a very fast pace had already elevated their level of observability, and if you haven't, then now is the time, because having people being remote, having people being distracted by what's going on in their life, and obviously the entire world health situation and the pandemic that's going on, making it really hard to focus. And while maybe in normal time where people work from the office, you could use the basic tools that are being offered by Azure or by any other provider, whatever you can get. Now in time when there is a situation or something is going on, there is a production issue, and you can't run around and find someone to say, hey, take a look at this, because that person is not sitting next to you anymore. The need to have proper observability, the need to kind of like elevate your level of observability on tools is increasing. So what Logz.io does is, first of all, if I look at the way we've made it really, really simple to ship data and especially when talking about Azure and other cloud providers. So you can see that Azure, it's really easy to get all the Azure activity logs, getting stuff from the diagnostics log, getting stuff from Event Hub. All you need to do is basically point your infrastructure data into these systems, and with the very few steps, you get the information into Logz.io. We do all the heavy lifting, so you basically just need to point the data here, and when I mean do the heavy lifting, so we make sure the data is ingestion, we make sure the data is properly parsed and into fields, we make sure that there are visualization and alerting to see the data and get alerted when something goes wrong. Same thing goes for metrics. So if you go with Azure metric monitoring, very simple way of setting it up and getting the data in. What Logz.io is, and start by that, is an open source observability. We've taken the best of breed open source that are being used today to monitor environment by all the big companies. So we're using ELK, which is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana for log analytics. We're using Grafana for infrastructure monitoring and metrics. We're using Jaeger for APM and distributed traces. And the value that we bring, other than having it all being 100% managed, that you don't need to do any ops or any work to maintain that these systems, we also provide it to you in a cost-effective way, in a way that it's integrated. So in the example here, I'm going to run through a very quick example and show a few of the capabilities that we've added to help deal with the complex situation. So this environment here, we're monitoring a Kubernetes environment. I can visualize how many containers are running. I can see how they behave. We have an integration with the events coming from the logs. So you see here, there is a tab here that says configuration changes. These are in failures, which is basically exceptions and errors and something like that. We know how to mark them on the graphs and see what's going on. So it creates the synergy between the data that you get from the logs, which is unstructured data, and the data that you get from your infrastructure monitoring. We also give you the ability to quickly go the other way. So if for this example, I can see that there is, I see an increase in CPU consumption of one of my Kubernetes pods, Nginx GZ7 VI. I can see that the same pod has increase in memory consumption. And the first thing I want to know is why. So now this information gave me what's going on in the environment. In order to know what's going on, I can simply click here and explore data in Kibana. What we do is we basically copy the query relative to that pod. So you can see that the same pod name is being copied here, and the time frame that I was looking at Grafana. So I can immediately see here that following and in parallel maybe to the increase in memory consumption and increase in CPU utilization, I can also see an increase in logs, and I can see that there's some level of IO exception that's happening here, too many open files, probably a problem with the code that I'm running inside, and this is what's causing this this whole pod to fail. Now I can take very simple actions in order to fix the situation or to resolve what's going on here. So the ability to very simply ingest the data that you're currently using on the Azure Monitor, on the Azure Event Hub for login in a very, very simple way, literally with a click of a button, and the ability to have all this pre-built information with the connectivity between the infrastructure monitoring and the logging, making engineers' life easier right now. I want to show kind of like a few capabilities that we've developed, especially for a situation like this. So one of them is the incident reports. So it's very important, especially, and we do it internally, and I'm sure other organizations do it as well. Whenever something happens in production, an organization like ourselves that push 100 times a day to production, everything is completely automatic and automated in our environment. Things can go bad, and we have a way to fix them. But we want to make sure that whenever something goes bad, we have the ability, and especially when people are remote, to record the situation for other people to look at and investigate. So we have the ability of recording different dashboards that appeared during the issue that was having and how we fixed it, and record some text and connect it into Jira, and make sure that all of it is properly processed, and we have this information. I think it's also very important for teams working remotely to be able to access such information, to be able to collaborate remotely on things that are going on. So these are the things these are some of the things that we do when we have in the system in order to make engineers and ops and DevOps lives easier in such a situation where people work remotely.
I think, Asaf, that's really cool. One of the things that I noticed was when you were showing how easy it is to hook this into Azure was the ARM template. I think it looks like you're going back there right now, but there was a one-click deploy to Azure button. And the way those buttons work for anyone on the call is it's actually linked over to an ARM template, and you can fill in data, you can use a parameters file, or you can pop that into your infrastructure CI/CD pipelines, and you can actually add that in as another deployment step, whether you're using Azure Pipelines, GitHub Actions, if you're using Jenkins, if you're using CodeFresh, TeamCity, Octopus Deploy, whatever your CI/CD system is, you can add a step very easily and actually, with one command, be able to deploy out that ARM template, because you could use the Azure CLI, which to me is even easier than just clicking a button, because now I do it on an automated and replicated state, and me as maybe the ops side of the engineering DevOps team, I don't have to worry about, did we have observability on this cluster? Did we handle it with this infrastructure deployment? It's now actually part of my process. So I think that that's really, that already simplifies a deployment, that already simplifies any additional infrastructure overhead. And then how easy is it to configure the dashboards and actually ingest the data? Once I have the connection made and the data is being sent, how easy is it to actually start visualizing things and parsing the information that's being ingested?
Sure. So let me show you kind of like a quick example. So obviously we're using Kibana, which is, I think, the most used and the most common log analytics system out there. But it's very easy to go and first of all search for information. So if I want to search and I know that there is something going on in my environment and I want to search for all the errors, just like you would with with Google, you go and search, or with anything else, you would go and search and you find all the messages that include error. So it's very easy to do it. Also, the ability to kind of like look at a specific time for what I know that there is a problem there makes it very easy for me to understand what's going on. So these are the things that you would get out of the open source. One of the things that we've added into Kibana, and I'll show you in a minute, is the ability to have log patterns. So if I'm looking at here, and this I'm looking at a 12-hour window, but it could be just a 2-hour window for all that matters. There are about almost 500,000 different logs in here, and I'm not going to go through read all of them. So especially in large verbose environment, this can be a situation even if I'm looking at only 10 minutes. What we've implemented is called log patterns. We within a fraction of a second, we turn all these logs, the 500,000 logs, into 50 different patterns, and we know how to do it. So we're using machine learning to cross correlate different log lines, and we do it on the ingestion side. So it doesn't matter if there's 500,000, if there's 10 million log lines, it just works just as fast. So this gives me the ability to first of all understand what's going on and scan through the issues and say, hey, this is maybe something that I know about. It happened 12% of the time, and this is something I don't know about, and it only happened 4% of the time. Might as well go and check it out. So these are some of the things about the efficiency that we've created into it in order to visualize the data better. If I do want to create a visualization, it's very simple. So show you just an example. So sorry. I go and I can create a visualization. You can see the range and the vast ability of how to visualize the data. For this one, I select a line graph and I select the index that I'm using, which is basically the data that I have. The basic thing that I can do is I can say, yeah, I want to see the count of the messages, and on the x-axis, I want to set the a date histogram, which means the time, and with a very simple click, now I can see the messages over time. Now I want to see all the errors in the system. Same thing that I did before. You see how quickly it was that I see the errors in the system, and if I want to do it for 48 hours or 24 hours, I can see the errors in the system. Moreover, so the other thing I can do is I can add more information, and you can see how easy it is. I can split the series and say, hey, I want to do it by a term aggregation, and I want to select the pod name, for example. And now I'm seeing errors only on different pods, and I see that the only pod that was having errors was my Nginx. So if I eliminate this search and just search for all the messages, I can see all the messages that are happening throughout my environment with this. So this is how easy it is and how simple it is to be able to visualize data and see what's going on here in this environment. So we built it. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that's really cool, but so I mean, there's obviously a lot of data. There's a lot. You said you had 500,000 events in there. You're parsing through things. Is there any limitations as to what kind of integrations, what kind of data, what kind of filters, visualizations you can do? Like, I guess I'm thinking like, what's the catch? This looks great, but what is limited?
It's a good question. So we've made it easy, and you can see here the level of data that you can set. So there isn't any limitation on the data that you can set. So different libraries that we support, obviously different application. If you're using Kubernetes or using GitHub, is very, very simple to connect, and we have hundreds of integration and dashboards and anything around this. Some limitation that includes in it is we don't have any limitation of the amount of data. We have companies, including ourselves, sending petabytes and petabytes of data every day. Since we're running on the cloud ourselves, we're running on Kubernetes ourselves, the ability to scale up and down is seamless, and we enjoy the benefit of it. So that's this limitation. So because this is all built on Elasticsearch, which is a great search open source database, then also the speed of search is not impacted by the amount of data that exists here. So we created this overlay on top of the data that you already have, making it easy for you to visualize it.
That's awesome. And I think I saw, not only from when you were scrolling, not only did I see like clouds, I saw Azure and obviously Microsoft, and that is Microsoft. Sorry, I was trying to say AWS and Azure, but I also saw different operating systems and applications. So even if I wanted to granulate and send data from a specific application, I could embed Logz.io into things like Java or whatever my application actually is. Is that correct, or did I misunderstand that?
That is correct. And the real value of having something like that, and I'm just going through the library so to see the different languages and different programming languages that support, whether it's Java, whether it's Go, Ruby, Python, .NET and such. So the real value of having all the data correlate is that you can collect the data from your infrastructure, whether it's the Azure infrastructure, you can easily collect it. You can collect the data from your Kubernetes environment using a daemon set, connects to Fluentd, collect the data. You can collect the data from the code running inside your pod, inside your clusters, and the ability to bring it all into one place and correlate them in time and being able to analyze them in one place. That's kind of like the advantage of where things come to play, and this is where we create the simplicity on managing a complex environment. I think we've all been in an environment where there's like monolithic servers. You know there's a problem, you SSH into the machine, you go through the log files, you understand what's going on. Today we live in a different world. We live in a world where everything is very dynamic, ephemeral. Servers code go up and down with serverless, with function, with Docker and Kubernetes and different management infrastructure like AKS. You can't really SSH into the machine because by the time you come to investigate the problem, that piece of code may not be running anymore, and there is a different piece of code which is running on a different pod with a different name. And the ability to collect it all in real time is today the only ability to be able to troubleshoot it and to be able to get to the bottom of things. So I think having something like that, something like Logz.io is a huge benefit for managing complex environments.
I think that's awesome. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Jessica, just a quick question from the audience here. Asaf, on that topic of quickly responding to issues and quickly investigating data, one of the questions from the audience is how to configure alerts and how to send alerts to different notification systems.
Sure. So obviously, creating alerts is very simple. So I can create an alert here. Going back to the previous example, I want to search the word error, and then with a very simple click of a button, I can create an alert. And I'll show you a few alerts that are already done here.
And just to clarify, that when you create this alert, this is ingesting all the data from all your systems. It's whatever you add into that filter or that search. So you could be monitoring multiple production environments, multiple clouds, multiple applications, and you can create one alert for all of your production systems, regardless of where they're currently running. Is that correct?
Correct. It is correct.
That's
and
awesome.
the ability
That's
to collect
amazing.
it all into one. Yeah. So this is just a simple alert. I can save the number of logs in this, and we have different conditions, and obviously we have tags and we have different notification points. So you can collect it to Slack, you can send an email to it, and make it very, very easy for you to configure an alert with this one. So that makes it very easy to do it. The same thing goes with the Grafana solution. You can configure alerts there, and you can also run correlated alerts. You can say, hey, I want to get an alert if my CPU spikes above 80% and I see an increase of error logs from that specific pod. So we can create like correlated alerts on this. Did that answer the question?
I mean, I think so. It's pretty. It shows pretty simple how to create alerts, and not just how to create an alert. Obviously, per system, you're creating it for the data and for the query that you've configured. Another question that I have is, so this is great to help kind of visualize the state of our systems and see what's going on. But what about connecting this to the state of what's currently going on right now? I understand that Logz.io, you guys did something actually very unique with the COVID data that's going out. Trying to get information very quickly and trying to get that information in real time, I know is challenging. How would you visualize data, clear data like that? Data from the amount of infections, the amount of deaths, the amount of what's actually going on, to actually visualize that in a graph and ingest that mass amount of data that's sometimes troublesome for the average person to find?
Sure. So let me show you some of the things we did with the COVID data and just look into a different account. So we basically, what we do is part of what we do is we help organizations with analyzing the data, since basically you can pour a lot of information into Logz.io, and it doesn't really matter the source. Obviously, we made all the connectivity very easy and simple for DevOps, for infrastructure monitoring and such, but we can establish data as well. So we've made a connection with the Johns Hopkins, and we're getting information about COVID status, and you can see here in some of the dashboards that we've built on it, we're offering this data to anyone who's doing some investigation and some assistance with it. So we're tracking total confirmed cases with total death recovered, geolocation spread into geographies, growth in different countries. And this is an example of how we take raw unstructured data, we convert it in structured information, and we let anyone who is into analyzing and investigating and helping in resolving this word crisis take a look at the data. So these are the things that that we do, and it's very simple. It's very simple to do in the exact same way, and you see the different dashboards and different visualization that we create and we let other people create as well. So it's a very generic system, and I think you can understand how if we're taking like very generic data that is we didn't build it, it's very unstructured, divided by a health organization, how taking data from your own code, from your own environment, from the Azure environment can be used to visualize it in a very simple and easy way.
Just out of curiosity, how long did creating these kinds of dashboards and ingesting all that data and scrubbing different external sources, how long would you say it took you to put together this kind of dashboard?
So because this is data that we don't usually consume, it's not like we're connected to an infrastructure level or to a code level. I think it took us about a day to ingest the data and properly parse it, and then building out the dashboard is very easy. I can show you how you build the different visualization and just place them here. So probably a few more hours and you can build more and more dashboards.
I think that's pretty impressive. And at just about a day, you can ingest data that even if you're not used to ingesting it, right? Unstructured data, and you now are not used to creating these kinds of dashboards. I know when I've talked to engineers that are trying to manage these systems and deploy them and set them up from a self-managed perspective, it takes them weeks and months to get them deployed and get them configured properly. So it's honestly impressive that, I mean, to take just about a day is really incredible.
Yeah, definitely, and obviously it's much quicker when it comes to ingesting your own data, which what we do is infrastructure monitoring and log analytics, and we're specializing in the Kubernetes and the cloud environment, so that makes it much easier.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, focusing on that and how it is easier when you're working with your own data, but it's also easier when you have something that's managed to simplify some of the overhead, right? What I usually hear from conversations with customers who are using open source technologies, specifically in terms of observability, is that the overhead and the time investment it takes to get all these things configured it's almost cost prohibitive just from a time perspective. And then trying to figure out not only set them up, but then learn them and understand them. It seems like you've really made that more cost efficient from both time, from a simple and easy pay as you go, or however the pricing plans work, but you've really kind of made this more cost efficient, whereas before this was almost like a black hole, I think.
Correct, and I think this is kind of like where we come in, and I wanna I'm jumping back quickly to our other environments, and I want to highlight a few capabilities that we've done in order to make it cost efficient. And you mentioned the limitation in previous questions, and obviously the more data you send, the more expensive it is. The more data you send, the harder it is for you to troubleshoot and understand what's going on, because now you have to go through a lot more data. So I just want to highlight a couple of capabilities that we've developed. So one of them is the log patterns, which we've seen, which I've shown before, and the ability to go through it and quickly say, hey, maybe this log line, which is taking up 13% or 13.5% of my data, is irrelevant for me, or I rarely use it, so I don't need to send it. I can save data. I can save money on doing that. So that's kind of like one thing that that we've developed. The other thing which we've developed, we call it the drop filters. And the organization do it, and our customers and ourselves as well, we use it to basically send Logz.io all the data that we want, but not pay for all the data that we want. We only pay for what we ingest. So basically, I can send, and we're sending all of the debug data from all of our system, which is a lot of data, and we drop them at the entrance, which means that we're archiving them using archive and archiving them into Azure Blob or a different archiving mechanism, and but they're not being ingested into Elasticsearch. We're not being paid for. When we do want to debug, it's very easy, and with the click of a button to now start ingesting them. So if I have 10 times more data that is in debug mode or in different things that I need to analyze, we make it efficient. Say, hey, You only pay for what you need all the time. If you need something that is special, or you need something that is that you need in different situation, and obviously it's unlikely you need to debug the entire system at the same time. You mostly likely know which services you want to, which cluster you want to, which pods you want to investigate, which region, and we give you an easy ability to create this drop filter and manage them to create efficiency in what we do. So these are things that that we've created in order to increase the efficiency here. The other thing I also wanted to highlight is our connectivity with Jaeger. Jaeger is distributed tracing, the leading open source for distributed tracing. Very simple, very easy to connect it, and it kind of like completes the picture between the infrastructure monitoring, the log levels that you see from your infrastructure and from your own code. Very easy to set it up, and you can get complete traces that are going on. And we live in a world where a trace can go through 50 different microservices and being able to track it and running in parallel, and they're all going up and down, and being able to track it is important in a distributed manner. So setting up a Jaeger is also very simple to do. You can see the traces here. You can see that I have a red indication here, meaning that I have an error. I can see the connectivity to my logs. So these are the log events that are coming from the log analytic, and our ability to basically correlate between all of it. So also creating efficiency in troubleshooting performance issue very, very quickly with everything in one place.
Thanks, Asaf. I know we're bouncing around a little bit here, but a couple more questions from the audience on some more questions on log shipping. Does Logz.io have the ability to ingest logs from like custom logs from applications, from on-premise environments, and from Azure Log Analytics? Those are 3 separate questions.
Sure. So we do have a way to obviously custom logs on application level, whether you're using the application, whether you're using your own code, using the libraries. So if you're running in Java, you can use Logback, you can Log4j, whatever you do, and you can also just send us a JSON. So you can just ship the data to us with different, like for example, with a bulk HTTPS, and you get the data of how you ship the data kind of like to us in a very easy and simple way. So definitely easy to do that. When it comes to Azure and the Azure, the way Azure working with logging is that you set up all your log from all your infrastructure level into Event Hub. And then like either with a click of a button or using the ARM template, like Jessica mentioned, it's very easy to set it up and send the data directly to us. So this is what we do. This is our business, to be able to collect all the data from all the various sources, whether it's the Azure environment, whether it's the infrastructure level that you have in other places, whether it's on-prem that we also support, and we have quite a lot of customers that are sending us on-prem. For example, part of our security practice, a lot of security devices that we support are on-prem devices, and we have a way to collect information from those as well.
From the on-prem situation, is there any kind of networking configuration someone would need to do, port configuration in the event that somebody has maybe more strict firewall rules? I know I end up having quite a few conversations, even from trying to do on-prem deployments in CI/CD, and sometimes there are limitations as far as what's being allowed to send due to ports that's needed or permissions. How much access does Logz.io need in an on-prem scenario? Or is it just making sure that they can send out data and that's it?
It's basically making sure that they can send out data, and obviously we're running on Azure, so it's easy to set up, and we usually give customers that have a more restrictive access out our ports and IP addresses that you can enable them on your firewalls. We usually recommend companies that are even stricter to ship it to their own Azure configuration, and then using kind of like a direct connectivity between the different environments to send the data to us. This way, it makes sure that the data is it's not going out in any given point of time. So, but we have ways to do it.
And I guess one question is, what about those customers that maybe aren't using the cloud yet? Maybe they're still on-prem, maybe for whatever reason, security, personal, professional, they are managing their own on-prem Kubernetes clusters. Would they still be able to take advantage of Logz.io as well?
They will be able to take advantage, and we have quite a few. One of the things that actually surprised us is that I think the adoption of Docker and Kubernetes is outpaced the adoption of the cloud, and we do see organizations that run kind of like a maybe a hybrid solution, that they run quite a lot of Kubernetes on their on-prem environment, and that's for them. It's also a cloud migration strategy of let's make sure everything is Dockerized first, and then it's going to be easier for us to migrate. But we do have quite a lot of them, and it's just as easy to send it from an on-prem Kubernetes to Logz.io as it is from Azure to Logz.io.
And I think I remember you saying earlier, one of the reasons how come it's easy is I can deploy out just a daemon set for Logz.io to my K8s cluster, right?
Correct. So if you look at this, what we do is, so Kubernetes comes with Fluentd inside, so it's very easy. You deploy a daemon set into your own cluster, which listens to the Fluentd and just send the data to us. So just as easy to do it, whether you're running on AKS, whether you're deploying your own Azure, your own Kubernetes cluster, or whether you're using on-prem.
Nice.
Yeah.
Charlie, did we answer all those questions, or were there any more that we haven't gotten to yet? I want to make sure everyone has a chance to be heard.
Yeah, there's a good amount of questions here, so I'm doing my best to respond to a few of them within the chat here. Asaf, I have a question that I think you'll enjoy answering. How do you set up Elasticsearch indices for Logz.io?
So what Logz.io does is we're basically creating an abstraction layer around this. So you don't have to set up the indices, you don't have to set up the clustering, you don't have to set up the sharding, you don't have to decide the shard size and the data. We do it all for you. You can also, but we do give you the ability to create different sub accounts. So if you do want to create this information, you can go into the manage accounts, and you can see here that you can create different sub accounts, and basically different sub accounts go to different indices, and you set up different times and different retention for each one of these sub accounts. And this is kind of like how you manage capacity. This is mostly used for two different use cases. One of them, usually large organizations that they want to hand out capacity to their teams, and it's being managed from a centralized location. So team A is going to get this sub account, team B is going to get that sub account, and you want to create a data segregation between all of them. So that's one use case. The other use case is that some organization, they split the data from the development, the staging, and the production, and they want to make sure production is only production data and only production logs and metrics, and staging can go wild, and obviously the dev can go wild, and you can do whatever you want there, but keeping kind of like production clean from a capacity management and stuff like that. So it's very easy. You can add a sub account and you allocate more capacity to it. But we wrap the entire Elasticsearch, and we do all the index management, all the sharding, all the mapping of Elasticsearch. We also do mapping conflicts. So if you're familiar with Elasticsearch, if you're saying data which is conflicting with data already existing in the cluster from a mapping perspective, you usually get the infamous mapper parsing exception. And it's currently estimated about 1% of the log data is being dropped because of these issues. We have ways to solve it. We have a way to put it in a dead letter queue. We have ways to flatten the data and make sure it's in. We have a way to fix the data and change the mapping, and obviously change the index when it happens. So this is what we do as a company.
Thanks, Asaf. One more question here. We're at about 46 minutes. So unless there's some more questions rolling in, I think we can begin to wrap it up after this. Could you briefly kind of go over again how the process of archiving and restoring logs. So once you drop certain log types, if you could go over the process of restoring them and re-ingesting them, that would be great.
Yeah, so the process of archiving is very simple. So the example I see here in this account is with AWS S3 bucket, but it works just the same with Azure Azure Blob. So you basically give our role the permission to write into that blob or bucket, and that's how basically we archive all the data. So if we archive all the data on ingestion, so everything you sent to us, if you've configured the archiving option, then we're gonna dump it into Azure Blob. The way you restore it, and you have a way of selecting the time frame that you want to restore. And you basically restore the time frame, and we put it in a separate index in a separate account that lives for a few days, so it doesn't impact your ongoing ability and your ongoing monitoring or observability. So if you want to restore data from 2 months ago, it's not suddenly going to appear in today's data. So we keep it separate. You see the data as it was 2 months ago, and you can investigate it. Again, it lives for a few days and then it automatically disappears. We can work with you to extend it if you need a longer investigation, but we find it usually useful. So it's all self-service, very simple configuration, and the data is restored, and same thing being archived, and the same way restored back.
Great, thanks, Asaf. And it doesn't look like there are any more questions. So if you have any lingering ones, feel free to ask them. Jessica, are there any closing questions? Any thoughts you'd like to bring up here?
I guess one question just on the archiving and restoring of data. If we're offloading to external storage accounts, whether that's with AWS, Azure, Google, wherever, how long does that restore or that archive take? Because now you have a potential latency issue if you're trying to archive, I don't know, petabytes worth of data. That's usually been a blocker that I've seen with customers moving even from one cloud to another, is trying to move large amounts of data now becomes a challenge.
Yeah, so obviously we are bounded by the ability to read the data off of Blob or S3 or Google environment. And what we usually find customers that use the log data to investigate is they have more leniency towards the ability to restore. So even if it takes a couple of hours to restore the data, it's fine and it's acceptable. It's not like there is a burning production issue right now. It's just a matter of, I want to analyze usually a security incident, what happened 2 months ago, 3 months ago, or I want to see a trend of an error, whether it was happening 2 or 3 months ago, to know how common it was. So these are things that that we usually see, but we obviously are bounded by the ability of extracting data from these devices.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to highlight just one last thing, and I think before we wrap up is our insights, and it also goes to speak to the efficiency and the ability of running teams remotely. What we did here at Logz.io, we're correlating between your CI/CD environment and what we call insight, which is data that we collect from the internet about issues in operation, issue in monitoring, and issues in observability. So the gray bars that you see here are different actions that were taken by CI/CD system or configuration change management, and all these lines with the dots in the beginning are different insights. So if I go for an example here, I can see that there is a potential rev slider security exploit detected. This is a security insight. The system is automatically detecting it. So we're crawling the internet on a continuous basis, having hundreds of thousands of different events that we see in the system, and we're comparing these events in real time to your data and to the logs that you send. Basically, what we do is we're searching every search any DevOps engineer has ever searched his data. We're searching that data, that question. We're asking that question, your data, and if it has a hit, then we're highlighting to you that it happened. So these lines here and the dots here are indicating when things start and how they operate and what the patterns and their proximity to a different action that was taken by you or a configuration change, because based on our experience and our customers' experience, usually when things start to go bad, there's two questions engineers ask themselves: is when did it start, and what change preceded the start of it? So by doing that, we give you these two answers. Also give you kind of like a connectivity to different blogs and different threads that we found on the web that describe the problem, and maybe give you a thread into starting investigating it and starting to understand what's going on there. So another very powerful tool speaks to the efficiency running complex environment. Usually people grab a lot of open source tools that they don't always have the proficiency of managing every single configuration in them, and sometimes it's a pretty good tool to give you a highlight of what's going on in the environment. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Awesome, thanks Asaf, and thanks Jessica. It looks like there are a couple more questions that we might not be able to get to today, but feel free to reach out through our website to get those answered. Jessica, Asaf, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you,
Thank you
Asaf.
very much.
This was really incredible to kind of see how everything is organized, easy, and efficient.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica. It's really nice.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy, stay safe, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.